Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. Margaret Atwood wrote, "Nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it." That's a really good metaphor for today's case, the murder of an elite college student and athlete named Yeardley Love. It's a case of intimate partner abuse, often called murder in slow motion. There were red flags, not just in her relationship, but in her boyfriend, George Huguely V. His behavior away from his girlfriend was often obnoxious. He was a mean drunk who often claimed he blacked out. The entitled young man who had rarely been told no in his life had developed a serious drinking problem while still in high school. It only got worse in college. If friends saw red flags, it was George's drinking, not the way he treated Yardley. Yardley just wasn't the type of girl anyone suspected of being abused. Of course, we know that domestic violence permeates beyond socioeconomic boundaries. But often a woman in an abusive relationship does show small signs, even if she won't tell. She might become withdrawn or depressed. Yardley's friends and family didn't see this. Her friends that did know of some of the abuse still saw Yardley as a strong young woman who had taken control of the situation. And she thought she had. She had fought back. She refused to be intimidated. And she had just broken off the relationship. We also know the most dangerous time for victims of domestic abuse is when they end the relationship. Yardley would be dead within days of last speaking to her ex-boyfriend. Welcome to episode 88, Yardley Love, the UVA Lacrosse murder. Charlottesville, or Seaville to locals, is an independent city in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It was named for the British Queen Consort Charlotte, the wife of George III and the last Queen of Virginia. Charlottesville is centrally located in the eastern foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains and was home to two presidents, author of the Declaration of Independence and third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, and fifth President, James Monroe. Thomas Jefferson designed his home Monticello himself after inheriting the land from his father. It was a huge plantation at the time, sitting on 5,000 acres of land and using enslaved African people to cultivate tobacco and other crops. Many historians feel that Jefferson's legacy as a founding father, espousing that all men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence, was tarnished by his ownership of slaves. Despite this, and a rumored sexual relationship with Sally Hemings, one of his slaves, he is generally praised for his advocacy of religious freedom and other public achievements. Jefferson also designed the University of Virginia, which along with Monticello was designated a World Heritage Site. He not only designed the architecture of Virginia's flagship university, but he also conceived of the original courses of study. Virginia was already home to the College of William and Mary, and though it was Jefferson's alma mater, he became disenchanted with the school because of its strict religious foundation and what he saw as the stifling of the study of sciences. Contemporary universities of the day offered only medicine, law, or divinity to study. The first UVA students could study in one or more of 8 independent schools within the college: medicine, law, mathematics, chemistry, ancient languages, modern languages, natural philosophy, and moral philosophy. UVA was founded on its separation of religious doctrine, and the campus, known by students as the grounds, was planned and centered around a library, the rotunda, rather than a church, as was the tradition of most universities of the time. Jefferson remained actively involved with the university until his death, hosting dinners for faculty and students at Monticello even in old age. When he died, he insisted his grave only mention his accomplishments as author of the Declaration of Independence and the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and as the father of the University of Virginia. Today, the University of Virginia offers 121 majors across the 8 undergraduate and 3 professional schools. Alumni have founded billion-dollar companies like Reddit and CNET, which together generate $1.6 trillion in annual revenue and have created some 2.3 million jobs. UVA has also been ranked near the top of collegiate athletic programs in recent years. In 2015 and 2019, the men's basketball Cavaliers won the Capital One Cup as well as the NCAA March Madness tournament in 2019. UVA also won the 2019 Men's Lacrosse Championship. And of course, lacrosse will figure largely in today's episode, as both the victim and murderer were players for UVA. I'm going to pause now for a short commercial break. Yardley Love had always wanted to attend the University of Virginia. She lost her father to cancer when she was 15 years old, and although he had attended UVA, he left to join the military and never got his degree. It was her mission to earn that degree her father, who worked as an investor for Morgan Stanley, had not been able to. Born on July 17, 1987, in Baltimore, Maryland, she was the daughter of Sharon and John Thomas Love III. She was 4 years younger than her sister Lexi, and the girls were very close. She adored and idolized her older sister. In photos, both girls have beautiful wide smiles and blue eyes, though Lexi was blonde while Yardley, or Yards as her family affectionately called her, was a brunette. She grew up in an affluent suburb of Baltimore called Cockeysville, where she and her family attended Mass every Sunday. Her mother, Sharon, taught hearing-impaired students in Baltimore City schools. The Loves were a tight-knit family, and Yardley began playing lacrosse with her dad when she was 5 years old. She started private school at St. Joseph's in kindergarten and was playing lacrosse by the 4th grade with the Skywalkers program in Cockeysville. She attended Notre Dame Prep, a private Catholic school in Cockeysville for high school, where she played field hockey and lacrosse. It was during her sophomore year that her father passed away from prostate cancer, 3 days after Christmas. Friends and family later told reporters that she showed the strength and grace of someone well beyond her years. She placed a lacrosse stick in her father's casket. The tragic loss at such a vulnerable age did not derail Yardley's personal life or her ambitions. She, her mother, and sister were extraordinarily positive people and remained active in the church and all other social activities. So Yardley pushed on, as did her sister, both academic overachievers. And they were both community-oriented, volunteering in soup kitchens in Baltimore when their extracurricular activities allowed time. When she was a senior at Notre Dame Prep, she was recruited by UVA to play on the women's lacrosse team. Sports Illustrated has a quote from Yardley from a team publication. She said, quote, "When I got off the phone with Coach Myers and she had offered me a spot on the team, that definitely topped the happiest and proudest moment that I will probably ever experience." Yardley was majoring in government and minoring in Spanish, and she had done an internship the summer before her death at a public relations firm in New York City. And she already had a job lined up after her graduation in May of 2010. Yardley was a star on the UVA team, not only as a fast defender, but as the ultimate team player. She often volunteered for extra drills and for practicing one-on-one defense against an attacker. Her positive attitude and tenacity on the field belied her petite stature. She was short and weighed about 100 pounds. Regardless, she was a fierce competitor and much beloved by her teammates. In her freshman year, she met her future boyfriend. The men's and women's lacrosse teams socialized a lot together. By the time of her death, the two had dated on and off for a couple of years. George was born on September 17, 1987, in Washington, D.C., to parents Marta and George Huguely IV. He has a younger sister named Taryn, born in 1990. Marta was a former model for Saks Fifth Avenue in New York. Her husband, George IV, came from a long line of rich and successful Georges. In 1916, partners Gallagher and Huguely opened their lumber company near historic LaDroit Park in Washington, D.C. The capital was a boom town, and the Hugleys made a lot of money by supplying lumber for houses as the city grew. Huguely bought out Gallagher in 1929, and the family has run the company since. When George Huguely Sr. died in 1937, he left a $1.4 million estate to his wife Mabel and his son. That is over $25 million in the year 2020. His son George Jr. graduated from D.C. Central High, now Cordoza, and the University of Pennsylvania. He ran G&H for 30 years, from 1937 until he retired in 1967. George II also made a lot of money, and his social standing as well as his financial holdings show that. He was a member of the Columbia Country Club in Chevy Chase, Maryland, which has no relation to the actor, except that his grandmother nicknamed him after a famous ballad. The town was formed in 1725 and was spelled and pronounced differently. I won't try to butcher the original pronunciations. The name actually goes back further to the Battle of Chevy Chase in 1388 between Lord Percy of England and Lord Douglas of Scotland. That's where the Ballad of Chevy Chase came from. It had always been a town for the wealthy elite, and in the 20th century, it was a sundown town, a place where black people had better not be caught after sunset, much like Vidor, Texas, the town that inspired the movie 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. My episode on the murder of Kathy Page, whose father erected the original 3 billboards in Vidor, is episode number 10. Into the 1920s, there were laws on the books in Chevy Chase forbidding the sale of land to Jewish or African Americans. These laws were voided by the 1948 Supreme Court decision Shelley v. Kramer. Though, as in Vidor, I'm sure that was more on paper than in practice. Anyway, George Jr., white and prosperous, was very much into sailing and bought property in Annapolis, joining 2 yacht clubs, the Corinthian and the Annapolis. His sons, George III and Jeffrey with a G, expanded the family business into real estate development. They opened the Huguely companies in Bethesda in 1982. Most of the Georges went only to the best local prep schools and universities. But George IV, our murderer's father, didn't follow the family tradition. Instead, after announcing his engagement to the model Marta Sanson in 1983, he attended the University of Tampa and Maryland, though it is unclear if he ever earned a degree. However, Marta got a business degree from Georgetown. The two were married on December 30th, 1983. Though he was a successful businessman in his own right, George IV was definitely known as a partier and a hard-drinking local barfly in Chevy Chase. Once Marta had George V, she became a stay-at-home mom, enjoying the posh life in Chevy Chase with a fancy home, club memberships, and entree to all of the exclusive society functions. In February 1996, Marta and George IV separated. He moved out of the house, leaving Marta with the kids, who he only saw on brief evening visitations or on vacation time. He often threatened to move back into the house, forcing Marta out. And on Christmas Day, 1996, he made good on that threat and forced his way back into the home. Marta took the kids and temporarily moved in with her sister. She filed for divorce on January 3, 1997, and the judge granted her attorney's motion to bar George IV from the home. So he begrudgingly moved out, and Marta and the kids moved back in. The divorce was so acrimonious that a judge ordered them to speak on the phone every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. to civilly discuss their children's schedules and to attend co-parenting skills enhancement classes. They were also ordered not to criticize each other in front of their children. Marta told the court that George IV made over $100,000 a year. But George IV had the audacity to plead poverty. He claimed that he and Marta had been living an unrealistic lifestyle that included a $600,000 home in Chevy Chase, with luxury automobiles, a boat, and over $500,000 in debt. And of course, they sent their children to the most expensive private Catholic schools in the area. George IV claimed the only reason he had been able to keep up this lifestyle was because his father, George III, lent him $1.5 million. And also because he liquidated his $450,000 trust fund his grandfather had set up for him. A friend later told the press that every time George IV got in trouble, his father would bail him out. So by my estimations, the family had spent nearly $2 million on George IV, keeping him in a lifestyle that he apparently loved and was accustomed to, despite how he tried to portray himself in court. Marta accused him of stiffing her and the children, while he continued to live this extravagant lifestyle, spending excessive money on his boat, country club memberships, and frequent vacations. All the while, he allegedly openly told Marta that he would act poor until he got rid of her. And then he would build a new house. Within a year, by December 1997, he owed Marta over $11,000 in back child support and attorney's fees. At this point, a judge ordered him to immediately pay Marta $1,000 or spend 10 days in jail. So of course he paid the money. By the fall of 1998, sick of George IV's lies to the court about his finances, Marta's attorneys subpoenaed his father, George III, and his uncle to testify to the truth of his finances. They also made a motion to garnish funds from George III's bank accounts and property held by the family's company firm. This must have finally scared the family into bringing the hammer down on George IV, because he suddenly settled his divorce with Marta in November of 1998. The settlement details were not made public, but we do know that Marta was allowed to stay in the Chevy Chase house for 14 months. At the end of that time period, if George IV wanted the house back, he had to pay her $100,000. He did not pay her the money until 2004. Marta remarried, keeping full custody of the kids, while their father had visitation rights. In their divorce settlement, they again pledged not to badmouth each other. But at George IV's new home on River Road, visitors said he kept a boar's head over the mantel that he referred to jokingly as Marta. Though one visitor dryly noted, quote, "I'm not sure that's very funny to the children." You have to wonder what kind of example his hard-drinking father set for George V. He never remarried, but dated, often taking a series of girlfriends on lavish vacations. One friend later said he had a Peter Pan complex. Despite all this ugliness between his parents, George V was described as a happy, funny, helpful, and caring child. His sister Taryn later said that George took care of her during their parents' cage match of a divorce. They were also raised by a nanny named Danielle. Naturally, George V's family characterized him as a smart, loving, generous, and spiritual young man. They said he was always loving and respectful towards family members. George attended modern-day school in Bethesda until the 8th grade. Then he attended high school at Landon School, a private boys' academy in Bethesda. But George did excel in school, well-liked by teachers and coaches. He was dedicated to sports and was a starting quarterback in high school, as well as playing lacrosse and basketball. A lot of people interviewed about George V mentioned his commitment to his religion. While at Landon, George was a 3-time honor roll student. After Yardley's murder, ugly aspects of George's personality came out in the press and in court. When he was a freshman playing football, George told his coach he would make a big play in exchange for a kiss from the young coach's fiancée. He intercepted a pass, walked off the field, kissed the young woman, and then asked for her phone number. He also once stole his lacrosse coach's car keys from his office and then drove his car onto the lacrosse field, laughing and talking to the coach from the driver's seat. These might seem like harmless school pranks, but it shows a cockiness and lack of respect for authority figures. And even at Landon, the private all-boys Catholic high school, George was known for his drinking. Later, friends said that was just the culture. They all drank a lot. Regardless, George graduated and went on to attend UVA, where he majored in anthropology and played lacrosse. And like I said, lacrosse was how he met Yardley. The men's and women's teams didn't just socialize a lot. They traveled together for away games and tournaments. They partied together, dated each other, and generally were a very close-knit group. And while I'm not a fan of generalizations, there is a perception of lacrosse being a very elitist sport, a sport for rich kids. It's natural they were exceptionally close. They came from the same kind of background of private schools and privilege. On the lacrosse field, George supposedly had strong leadership abilities. Like Yardley, friends said George was dedicated to a teamwork mentality. He was described as a burly midfielder. He was about 6'2" tall, weighing 209 pounds at his peak in lacrosse. He was later noted in the press as one of Cavaliers' fiercest attackers. But in reality, George wasn't as big of a star at UVA as he had been at Landon. The UVA team was full of really good players. He was a second fielder and not a starter. He was, however, again, known for his drinking. In 2007, George was charged with underage possession of alcohol in Florida. His family owned a $2 million vacation home there. In November of 2008, George was stumbling drunk into traffic near a Washington and Lee University frat house in Lexington, Virginia. A female police officer, Rebecca Moff, told George he needed to find a ride home or she would take him to jail. At this, George started yelling sexist and racist slurs at the officer and threatening her. He was saying things like, "I'll kill all you bitches." They struggled for almost 4 minutes before Moff finally had to use her taser on him. She later said, quote, "He was by far the most rude, most hateful, and most combative college kid I have ever dealt with." In court, he claimed to have been blackout drunk and didn't remember any of it. Court officers read back to him the things he had said that night, and he reportedly looked embarrassed and ashamed. He said, quote, "I'm so sorry. I can't believe I said that." His attorney and his parents felt he had a drinking problem and successfully got George a plea bargain. George pled guilty to resisting arrest and public intoxication. He was fined $100 and given a 60-day suspended sentence and 6 months probation. He was ordered to serve community service and attend a 20-hour substance abuse course. George was also ordered to tell the University of Virginia about the arrest, which he didn't do. If he had told the university, he would have been suspended from the team and possibly expelled. But he did brag about the incident to his friends. However concerned George No. 4 had seemed at his son's last court appearance, that didn't stop him from partying with his son when they were together. He invited George and his teammates on his boat and to weekends at his beach house. One player later said he drank with them and tried to be one of the guys. On winter break in 2008, just a month after his arrest in Lexington, George and his father got drunk on his boat off the coast of Palm Beach. George had wanted to go back to the beach, but his father refused, so he jumped off the yacht into the water, swimming back towards the shore. George IV was forced to call the police and Coast Guard to pick up his son. He was picked up by another vessel, and the report was logged as a domestic incident. To me, George No. 5 seems like the stereotypical spoiled, entitled rich kid. He always got his way, and when he didn't, and his temper tantrums got him in trouble, he always got off with a slap on the wrist. He had lived through a very ugly divorce, and sure, that will mess you up. And I think it's more than fair to say that his father behavior made a distinct impression on him. And to be fair, he wasn't the only lacrosse player at UVA who liked to party. One local said that the UVA lacrosse team were treated as local heroes, despite their alcohol-fueled brushes with the law. 8 of the 41 players on the 2010 team had been charged with alcohol-related offenses during their time at UVA, though 2 were found not guilty. I'm not sure you can call this lacrosse culture as much as just the general culture of drinking on college campuses. But UVA's team were winners, and people will ignore a lot of bad behavior from kids like that. The men's lacrosse team finished their 2010 season with a 14-1 record. They won the ACC tournament and were ranked first in the nation. The team was headed to the NCAA tournament. But friends noticed that in 2010, George seemed to go soft. He had lost his athletic intensity. One Charlottesville bartender described George as a big overgrown kid. The bartender said, "You'll see him walk in with other lacrosse players and you'd think, oh, there goes a bunch of lacrosse players and some other guy." George's friends later said that they had been planning to hold an intervention for George's alcohol abuse. Whether or not that is true is up for debate, as in the weeks before Yardley's death, George's drinking had intensified. They were both set to graduate in 2 weeks. And like Yardley, George already had a job waiting for him at a DC real estate firm. But Yardley was pulling away from him. She'd had enough of his shit, and his outbursts were becoming more violent. He was losing her, and he was losing control. I'm going to pause here for a word from our sponsors. In public, friends say George was always really polite and always smiling at Yardley. They did meet their first year in college, but they didn't appear to be a couple until the final 2 years. We actually don't know a great deal about their relationship. The violence in the relationship, at least what was known by close friends, came out later in court. But they had a lot in common, more than just lacrosse. Both were from affluent families, attending expensive private schools where they had been outstanding athletes. Both were seen as gregarious, fun-loving people to friends. The main difference would be in their family relationships. Though Yardley went through the trauma of losing her father as a teen, she had been in a loving and nurturing family, the beloved daughter of a healthy marriage. George No. 5 had grown up witnessing an extremely hostile divorce, and he had a father who preferred to drink with his son and hang out with his friends rather than actually parent him. After her death, in the press, Yardley's friends and family preferred to comment on her character and personal accomplishments. Those that did talk about George and Yardley's relationship vaguely described it as tumultuous, an on-and-off relationship. One friend did say that Yardley had tired of George's heavy drinking and lack of ambition, but no one spoke publicly of violence between the couple. The morning of May 2nd, 2010, started out as celebratory for George Huguely V. By 10 a.m., he was drinking beer and playing golf with his father at the exclusive Farmington Country Club in Charlottesville. Later, the whole men's lacrosse team had their annual golf tournament there that afternoon, and then they gathered in the club with their fathers to celebrate their recent victory. They were ranked number 1 in the nation and were headed for the NCAA tournament. Teammates would later tell the police that George had already been drinking all day and was noticeably intoxicated at the reception for the fathers and sons. 2 teammates later went with George and his father for dinner that evening. But they said because of George's obnoxious, drunken behavior, the dinner ended early. His teammates were embarrassed and didn't want to be seen in public with George. They said as they left the restaurant, George was urinating outside. George returned to his apartment at around 10:30 p.m. and, according to his roommates, kept drinking. They said they left the apartment at around 11:30 to go to the store, and when they got back, 15 to 20 minutes later, George was gone. But he was back by 12:15 a.m., and he looked strange to his roommates. They said there was a change in his demeanor, and he just had this blank stare. They said they kept asking him what was wrong, but he wouldn't answer. It's important to note here how close George and Yardley's apartments were. They lived one apartment building away from each other. George only had to walk some 75 steps and then up a flight of stairs to get to Yardley's apartment. Earlier that evening, 22-year-old Yardley and her roommate Caitlin had gone to a campus burger bar with several other UVA lacrosse players. It was walking distance from their apartment. It was a typical Sunday night for the players. They called it Sunday Fun Day. At around 10 p.m., Yardley and Caitlin left the bar and walked the 2 blocks back to their apartment. Caitlin wanted to go back out, but Yardley said she was tired. So Caitlin was headed out as Yardley took a shower and then went to bed. She left the apartment door unlocked, but Yardley had gone in her room and locked her bedroom door. Caitlin and her boyfriend got back to the apartment at around 2 a.m., and she immediately spotted a hole in Yardley's bedroom door. She looked in on her friend and noticed her hair was splayed out unnaturally on her pillow. Yardley was face down on the pillow, with the comforter pulled up over her. She moved Yardley's hair and saw blood on her face and neck and all over the sheets. She and her boyfriend called 911 and pulled Yardley out of the bed in an attempt to perform CPR. Caitlin said Yardley was only wearing her underwear. George would later say she had on a black t-shirt, and a t-shirt would later be spotted in crime scene photos, crumpled on the floor. First responders saw that one of Yardley's eyes was swollen shut and there were bruises and scrapes on her chin, and she had a very large bruise on the side of her face. Though EMS continued trying CPR, it was too late. Yardley Love was pronounced dead at the scene. Police asked Caitlin and her boyfriend to come to the station to make a statement. Caitlin told police about Yardley's abusive ex-boyfriend, George. She said that there were many incidents where George had, quote, either acted violently or threatened Yardley with violence. She told the police of a particular incident on February 27th, a little over 2 months before Yardley's death. She said Yardley had been hanging out with George at his apartment. They were in his bedroom when he wrapped his arms tightly around her neck. Yardley later said he had choked her, and she ran back to her apartment panicked. Caitlin said she was hysterical, crying and shaking. She had never seen her friend like this before. At 7 a.m., the morning of Yardley's death, police went to 22-year-old George's apartment and took him to the station for an interview. George waived his Miranda rights and confessed to what had happened, though he definitely was minimizing. George told police he had been in a relationship with Yardley, but it had ended, and he was pissed that she wouldn't talk to him. He said he last tried to contact her on April 30th, but she never responded. That would be 3 days before her murder. He said that as his roommates left the apartment to go to the store that night, he walked the short distance to Yardley's apartment, entering through the unlocked door because he wanted to talk to her. He admitted that he kicked Yardley's bedroom door in. Along with the hole in the door, George had wounds on his right leg, consistent with this story. But he said Yardley was the one who freaked out and became aggressive. Yeah, after you kicked in her damn door. Police noticed that he also had bruised knuckles. George claimed that he only grabbed Yardley and shook her, quote, a little bit, banging her head on the wall. He then said they struggled on the bedroom floor for a minute or so until he saw blood coming from her nose. And here is why her t-shirt being off is problematic to me. Was he trying to rape Yardley? Later, this is not addressed in court. If there had been signs of sexual assault, I'm sure they would have charged him with it. But it makes you wonder what really happened in that room. George did not admit to any attempt at sexual assault. He said they were, quote, struggling on the floor, and in his words, after he saw her nose bleeding, he stood up and tossed Yeardley on her bed, and then he took her laptop and left. He did not mention covering her with a comforter, though Caitlin was clear that Yeardley was covered up when they moved her to the floor to start CPR. George claimed he took the laptop, hoping he could force her to talk to him later if he kept it from her. But instead of keeping it, he threw it in a dumpster on the way back to his apartment. He told police where to find it. He insisted he had no idea Yeardley had been seriously injured when he left. Well, then why did you dump the laptop? The police who interviewed George did say that he seemed shocked to find out she was dead. Police video shows him saying, I did not. I never did anything that could do that to her. What is interesting to me is that up until now, when George screwed up, he had always claimed he had blacked out. He always said he didn't remember. He did that when he had to be tased by the female police officer in 2008. But he claimed to have total recall of his fight with Yeardley that night. On May 3rd, police charged George with first-degree murder as they kept investigating. By January of 2011, he was also charged with robbery, grand larceny, and burglary. Yeardley's downstairs neighbor, whose room was directly below Yeardley's, told police that around 11:50 p.m., she heard arguing and a very loud banging above her. She said it was so loud, it was like someone slamming the trunk of a car. She then looked out her window and saw a man leaving. But evidently, she wasn't concerned enough to call 911. Yeardley wouldn't be found for more than 2 hours when her roommate came home. Police searched George's apartment and found the pants he had been wearing, as well as a UVA Lacrosse shirt with bloodstains on it. George's keys and his passport were in his pants pocket. Police then started talking to more teammates and learned that in 2009, George found out that another lacrosse player had walked Yeardley home. He crept into the guy's dorm room and punched him while he was sleeping. Teammates claimed that the coach was told about this incident, but didn't do anything about it. Police also found out about another public incident. George and Yeardley were at a campus party to celebrate recent victories for both lacrosse teams when George suddenly jumped on Yeardley and started choking her. It was visiting players from North Carolina who intervened and pulled George off of Yeardley, not her teammates or George's. Police found that no one ever reported any of the incidents or things Yeardley told them to campus police. Yeardley didn't tell campus officials either. As I said, the men's and women's lacrosse teams were exceptionally close to each other. They ate together, hung out at bars together, traveled together, and often dated each other. Lacrosse culture has been compared to sorority and fraternity culture. Sports Illustrated made a good point. Because the teammates were all so close, they might have been, quote, reluctant to intervene in their relationship, fearful it could fray the bond between the teams. Searching both George and Yeardley's cell phones, police found many threatening texts to her and a lot of emails back and forth. After the February 27th attack, George had actually written Yeardley an apology. Quote, Yeardley, I cannot describe how sorry I am for what happened this past weekend. I am horrified about the way I behaved and treated you. I'm scared to know that I can get that drunk to the point where I cannot control the way I behave or act. I'm horrified to think that I was using physical force to keep you in my room. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry again, and I hope to talk to you when you feel like you can. I can assure you, though, that I will never act as I did Saturday night. I'm sorry again. Love, George. She evidently did take him back, though there was still trouble. On April 27th, a week before the murder, they got into an argument, and Yeardley apparently yelled at George for mistreating her and then hit him with her purse several times, dropping her cell phone, which he refused to return. She eventually got it back when he was away from his apartment. Following this fight, they sent angrily worded emails back and forth. On April 30th, George sent an email that said, quote, "That is so fucked up on so many levels. I should have killed you. I'm still in utter disbelief at everything that has happened recently and how you handle this." Yardley responded to the email with, "You should have killed me? ? You're so fucked up. So the more I think about it, I could care less that I attacked you. You deserved it, and we got a good laugh about it the next morning." To quote Margaret Atwood again, "Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them." He emailed her back and texted her, but she stopped responding. 2 days later, the night of May 2nd, drunk and in a rage, he went to her apartment. I'm going to pause now for a final word from one of our sponsors. Yardley's funeral was held on May 8th at the Cathedral of Mary Our Queen. UVA men's lacrosse players were pallbearers, and some 2,000 people attended the service. Early reporting on the death of Yeardley Love and the arrest of her ex-boyfriend, George Huguely V, was vague. Autopsy reports can often be released under the Freedom of Information Act laws, but in some states, like Virginia, the report is considered part of a person's medical record, even after death, and is therefore protected by statutory HIPAA laws. Meaning the media didn't really know what happened until trial, though they did get some facts from pretrial motions. In a preliminary hearing, Huguely's attorneys requested all of Yardley's medical records during her time at UVA. They seemed to be trying to prove that alcohol and a deadly mix of Adderall were actually the cause of her death. Headlines the next day screamed, "Yardley Love died from drugs, not assault." The judge, after reviewing her records himself for a week, denied the motion. He called it a fishing expedition. On February 6th, 2011, George's trial began in Charlottesville, Virginia. The prosecution said Yardley died as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. They based their case on first-degree murder. They said that George planned to kill Yardley and steal her laptop to destroy evidence of their earlier fights. They entered his confession into evidence, and witnesses testified to George's abusive behavior. The defense's main argument was that Yardley's death was an accident, that George was a, quote, "stupid drunk, a boy athlete who was incapable of murder." The defense admitted that George contributed to Yardley's death, but insisted it was involuntary manslaughter. One of the defense's strategies was to have two medical experts testify that Yardley's cause of death wasn't blunt force trauma, but from suffocating in her pillow after drinking alcohol and taking Adderall, which she did have a prescription for. A hired expert from Richmond testified that Yeardley died from a cardiac arrhythmia caused by her consumption of alcohol and Adderall. The arrhythmia, in turn, caused insufficient blood flow to her head. He further claimed that he found no lethal injuries to Yeardley's brain, and that any damage that was there was caused by the life-saving measures of first responders. Her skull was not fractured, but she did have a 2 to 3 inch hemorrhage on her scalp. But as most of you already know from podcasts and true crime shows, your skull does not necessarily have to be fractured to incur a fatal brain injury. When a person's head is impacted, either from a blow or from being shaken, the brain moves around inside the skull. If Yardley's head was beaten against the wall, the injury would not just been on one side of her brain, but also causing it to crash to the other side of her cranium. The simplest example is shaken baby syndrome. An expert in court likened it to a passenger in a car that gets thrown from an abrupt halt. Yeardley had a 0.14 blood alcohol content, meaning she was legally drunk, and she did have Adderall in her system. She had a legitimate prescription for Adderall, but of course, it's also well known as a college drug. Some use it to study and stay awake longer. Some use it when drinking so they can drink longer. In Yardley's case, she seemed to use the medicine as prescribed. The medical examiner found that neither the alcohol nor Adderall contributed to Yardley's death. It was blunt force trauma from her head being repeatedly beaten against a wall. He also found evidence of suffocation, though it did not cause her death, as well as a neck injury near the spinal cord that would have been caused by, quote, violent twisting. And she did have bruising to her neck and under her jaw. There was also a pattern of bruising on her back, arms, and chest that would be caused by someone violently grabbing her. George's blood alcohol content wasn't released to the public. The police didn't get a warrant to test his blood until almost noon, some 12 hours after he left Yeardley in a pool of her own blood. At that point, a blood alcohol test would not have been accurate to show how drunk George may have been when he assaulted Yeardley. In closing arguments, the prosecution said that George was a controlling abuser who killed Yeardley in a jealous rage. That seems to lean more on the side of second-degree murder or voluntary manslaughter. What you need for first-degree murder is intent. But remember, intent can be formed in a matter of seconds. We don't know how long George shook Yeardley, bashing her head into the wall. And from the wounds on her body, it would seem he may have tried to strangle her as well. Maybe despite his insistence that he thought she was alive when he left, when he saw the blood pouring out of her nose, he intentionally laid her face down on the pillow to suffocate in her own blood. Of course, maybe he did it so that if her roommate looked in, she might not see the blood and check on Yeardley. You could also see that as being on purpose, with George hoping that she would die in the night. Or you can see it as he freaked out when he saw the blood, left her on her bed, and hoped that in the morning when she woke up, she would be angry, but not alert authorities. She had never called the police before, and she had never reported any abuse to campus police. I honestly can see it both ways. The jury was allowed to consider the following verdicts: guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of voluntary manslaughter, guilty of involuntary manslaughter, or not guilty of all of these options. They were also asked to determine the different degrees of robbery or grand larceny, and whether he was guilty of burglary with intent to commit larceny or burglary with intent to commit assault and battery. Basically, they needed to decide if George went there with premeditated intent to kill Yeardley that night or to steal her laptop, or both. On February 22, 2011, after almost 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found George guilty of second-degree murder and grand larceny. He was found not guilty on all other charges, meaning the jury didn't believe that he went there with a premeditated intent to kill, nor did he break into her room expressly to steal her laptop. As I said before, I can see it both ways. I do think it's strange that of all of George's drunken incidents, he was able to recall this one. But then, maybe he had lied in the past when he claimed he didn't remember. He always played innocent about what he was capable of when he was drunk. The jury didn't find him guilty of voluntary or involuntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter is based on the heat of passion defense. Involuntary manslaughter means it was unintentional through reckless behavior that caused a death. So the jury definitely felt there was some degree of intent, though there was no premeditation. I tend to agree with their ruling. I think he was in a drunken rage. She had rejected him and refused to talk to him. He probably banged on her door, and when she refused to open it, he kicked it in. And unlike the other two violent incidents, Yardley had no one there to pull him off of her, and she was unable to break free. But at some point, when he was violently shaking her, banging her head against the wall, or when he was trying to strangle her, he did form intent. George was sentenced to 23 years for second-degree murder and 1 year for grand larceny. The sentences would be served concurrently. He appealed his conviction to the Court of Appeals of Richmond, Virginia, which upheld his conviction. In October 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear George's case. Before the trial began, an acquaintance of George No. 4 told a reporter, quote, "You have to wonder which kid you would rather have, the dead one or the one in prison." That infuriated me. Dead is forever, you moron. George Huguely V will be in his early 40s when he is released. Unlike many women of that age, he will still be able to start a family. And coming from the kind of wealth that he does, he will likely land on his feet in a way that most ex-cons do not. George's mother, Marta, told the press, quote, "We love Georgie deeply and will stand by him forever." She also said, "I don't have enough words to express my deep sorrow for the loss of Yardley's life." I'm sure she is sincere in her expression of sorrow, but I think we can all agree that George No. 5 will be just fine when he gets out of prison. My hope is that he learns in prison, that he faces his alcoholism and violent nature, that he becomes an advocate for education about intimate partner violence rather than just moving on with his life. Only time will tell. The University of Virginia awarded Yardley Love her degree posthumously. Then UVA president John Castine III was distraught over what had happened and how much the university was at fault. He asked himself, had George reported his 2000 arrest to campus and to his coach, could all of this been avoided? What if George's teammates reported his drunken behavior? Why didn't they stand up for Yardley? He even met with the Virginia governor, wanting to know if law enforcement could report student arrests to the university, but the governor would not commit on a plan for this. After Yardley's death, UVA offered a program called Let's Get Grounded. The name is a nod to the nickname of the campus as The Grounds. The program taught students how to recognize and react to potential problems like alcohol abuse, bullying, and intimate partner violence. They touted this as bystander intervention training, but as of June 2011, only 1,200 out of 15,000 students participated in the program. The most recent article I found on this program was from 2012, after the trial, though it sometimes is mentioned briefly in student newspapers. Following Yardley's death, UVA did make some changes. Since a ruling in 2004, students were supposed to tell the university if they had been arrested or convicted. But starting in the 2010-2011 school year, the university required students to disclose any arrests or convictions when they logged into the university computer system for the first time. Of course, you can't make people tell the truth, but lying would violate the school's honor code, leading to expulsion if it was later discovered. The Virginia Lacrosse Alumni Network, made up of more than 300 former men's players, raised $500,000 to fund the Yeardley Love Endowed Scholarship. The scholarship would be awarded annually to a women's lacrosse player. A few weeks after her death, Yardley's mother and sister formed One Love Foundation in her memory. The foundation was named after Yardley's jersey number 1 and last name Love. The purpose of the foundation was to work to end relationship violence through education and digital technology. The foundation offers a free phone app called One Love Lite. This app helps young men and women ages 16 to 24 determine, quote, their level of relationship danger and provide resources for help. The website, joinonelove.org, has a lot of resources for young people to learn about healthy and unhealthy relationships, how to deal with them, and as they say, how to love better. They claim to have helped educate more than 100 million people. Notre Dame Prep dedicated their new artificial turf field in Yardley's name. It was entitled Love Field. The lines on the field were 2 shades of blue, Yardley's class of 2006 colors. In 2012, Yardley's mom Sharon filed a wrongful death suit against George for $30 million in damages. In July 2018, the lawsuit was dropped, but it was refiled in November of 2018 and has not yet been resolved. In 2012, she also sued the coaches of the men's lacrosse team for $30 million in damages because they ignored George's assaults. In 2013, the suit was dropped. The One Love Foundation has blocked reporters and authors alike from interviewing teachers and officials from Notre Dame Prep and UVA. And Yardley's close friends have respected her family's wishes. They don't give interviews either. Her family chooses to keep as much of Yardley to themselves as they can. Yardley became the face of domestic violence on campus, whether her family had wanted her to or not. And they fought it for a while, insisting Yardley was, quote, no shrinking violet. But Sharon Love came to learn a great deal about intimate partner abuse and has opened up a lot about her own journey in understanding and accepting that. She said that she never thought Yardley would be hurt by a romantic partner. Quote, I didn't know then what I know now, that relationship abuse is a public health epidemic and that young women in Yardley's age group are at 3 times greater risk than any other demographic. She and Lexi spoke with Katie Couric in 2012, and they were aware of what was happening with George. But they didn't understand the gravity of the situation, and they didn't believe Yardley did either. Lexi said, quote, I think she didn't seem to think it was that big of a deal, that was it. They were over, and she wasn't going to be seeing him much anymore. It is so easy to see it from her point of view. Yardley was a college student. She had never witnessed any abuse, and she was about to graduate. She thought she was leaving UVA and wouldn't have to see George again. Her own friends didn't often see it either, or rather, they didn't see it as a problem. Yardley was definitely the sort of person to keep her chin up and not complain. Her friends may have simply believed she was handling it. They may have also thought, well, she broke up with him, so that's over. It's doubtful they knew enough about abusive relationships to know how much danger Yardley was in directly after breaking up with George. And as I have said in other episodes on domestic violence, some people do not recognize how serious choking is. Even the word is criticized by advocates. They say it should be called strangulation to emphasize the seriousness of the assault. But I've also spoken to a friend who is a 911 operator who said that in 20 years on the job, he has never had a woman call in to say that she had been strangled. The word they use is choke. I've also had other 911 operators reach out to me via email who say the same thing. What is important is that we recognize the seriousness of the act without splitting hairs over the terminology. If you or anyone you know has experienced choking or strangulation with intimate partner violence, you need to get help. It's not enough just to end the relationship. You need to go somewhere safe. I have resource numbers in today's show notes. And you need to press charges, no matter how hard it is. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You did nothing wrong. I've often discussed the need for more and better legislation on domestic violence and coercive control in this country. But we also need to remove the stigma. The more we can talk about it, and the more people who press charges and hold abusers accountable, the more we can move forward as a culture. Southern Fried True Crime is written and produced by me, Erica Kelley. The original graphic art is by Coley, and Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio. Special thanks to a listener named Emily who suggested this case. She didn't want credit, she just wanted cases like Yardley's told. If you or anyone you know are experiencing intimate partner violence, please see today's show notes for a list of resources. And thank you to Haley Gray for her diligent research assistance in this case. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe and please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. I'm also on most large platforms like Stitcher and Spotify. I've recently joined Stitcher Premium, and for 1 month, you can try it out for free by using my promo code, Southern Fried. After that, for about $5 a month, you can listen to Southern Fried and many other shows ad-free. Go to StitcherPremium.com and use promo code Southern Fried to sign up for 1 free month. If you're interested in supporting the show, please visit my website, southernfriedtruecrime.com. There you can sign up to be a patron of the show, make a one-time donation, or purchase show merchandise. That's southernfriedtruecrime.com. And don't forget to check out my YouTube channel. If you have any case suggestions, please email southernfriedtruecrime@gmail.com. I'm sorry, but I no longer answer private messages on social media. I manage 3 platforms and it is too overwhelming. But please feel free to reach out by email. Not only do I get my most interesting and little-known cases from listener suggestions, I love hearing from you guys. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.